Hi everyone. Ramadan Kareem. I'm Joyce Karam, Editor-in-Chief at Al Monitor, and I'm very glad you're able to join us today for this very important conversation. We meet at a very dangerous moment in the region. The US force levels near the Middle East are at their largest in 23 years since the Iraq War. We have seen partial evacuation from the US Embassy in Lebanon. We have seen withdrawal from a key US base in Syria. And we've also seen cancellations, as reported by Al Monitor, for many airlines to avoid Iranian and, in some cases, Israeli airspace. At the same time, there is diplomacy happening. There is back channel talks. We are awaiting a major third session for US and Iran talks in Geneva on Thursday. So where are we headed? Is this the environment for a deal, or are we heading to a major war? With me to try and answer these questions are excellent panelists. My colleague Elizabeth Hagedorn, Al Monitor's diplomatic correspondent. Elizabeth, great to have you.
Thanks, Joyce.
And also with us is the ever insightful and roving journalist Ali Hashem. We are also very lucky to have him. He's a senior reporter for Al Jazeera. He's an author. Just recently had a book out on Iran and on its main negotiator and foreign minister Araqji. And Ali was just in Tehran. So Ali, I'm really glad you were able to make it.
My pleasure.
Thank
You very
you.
much.
And also with us we have Holly Dagres. She's somebody who's also knows very well the Iranian scene. Herself, she spent her formative years in Iran. She's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute. She has an excellent newsletter called Iranist. And she really tracks the voices of change inside Iran, the shift that we're seeing with the new generation. Holly, great to have you with us on this panel.
Thank you. It's a real delight to be here.
Thank you. So, how we're gonna do this, as much as we can, conversation style. We have a big audience pool with us. So, if you have a question, please feel free to enter it at any point in the chat box, and we will try our best to get to as many questions as we can. I will also be fielding questions among our panelists, and I'm gonna start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, Thursday, Geneva talks. Where do we stand? How important, and what should we expect from this round?
Yeah, I think this is a good place to start, Joyce. Yesterday, a U.S. official confirmed to Al Monitor that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff will be traveling to Geneva for these talks. It's the third round. We expect them to follow the same format as before. So that is indirect negotiations with messages exchanged through the Omani foreign minister, and then, potentially a brief encounter directly between the negotiators. The Iranians are expected to put forward a proposal that would address U.S. demands. And for reasons I'm sure we'll get into, it's hard at this stage to envision an off-ramp that would allow President Trump to retreat from the multiple red lines he's drawn on military action. And part of the problem here is that this is just not an issue you solve over the course of a few hours once every week or so with the negotiators in separate rooms. Remember that the JCPOA took nearly 2 years to negotiate, and Trump said last week that 10 to 15 more days should be enough time. So I think it's important to consider there are so many technical issues that the negotiators are dealing with here, whether it's international inspector access, whether it's literally digging out Iran's uranium stockpile from under the rubble of last summer's strikes. Then there's the process of diluting it or shipping it out. And those steps must correspond with the sanctions relief the Iranians are expecting. And all of those things require patience and technical expertise. And it's for that reason that I'm personally skeptical that by Thursday we'll see anything resembling a breakthrough.
Do we know, Elizabeth, if these talks are focused just on the nuclear issue?
It's a good question. I mean, that is my understanding, although at times Secretary Rubio and other U.S. officials have said that any deal would require concessions on Iran's missiles and proxies. The focus for now really does seem to be on the nuclear issue. It was interesting. Steve Witkoff said in a Fox News interview over the weekend that the U.S. had two red lines. And those red lines that he mentioned were Iran must abandon enrichment and hand over its stockpile of near weapons grade uranium. He didn't mention the missiles or the proxies. Not to say those aren't coming up, but it doesn't seem to be the focus of at least this next round of talks.
Okay, I want to go to Ali. Ali, how dangerous is this moment? And you were just in Tehran. Tell us a little bit, how do things look on the inside for the regime at this moment?
Well, we are in a very dangerous moment, for the lack of another word, because what we are witnessing right now is just maybe the last few minutes before the next big thing. And I'm saying the next big thing because actually I'm not completely certain that the next big thing is going to be a war. This week is crucial. We would either witness a breakthrough, a real diplomatic breakthrough, and see a kind of a different engagement between the Iranians and the Americans. And I'm aware that there have been several messages, being exchanged on both sides, or between both sides, in the past 24 hours. And President Trump is actually pressing for something big. He's not looking for, let me say, symbolic concessions. And I don't think the Iranians are capable of offering real concessions. And over here we have the big gap. And that's why the situation is open towards all directions. Now, if and with a very big if, there is a deal on Thursday, because it seems that there should be a deal so that there'll be no war. It's either a deal or a war. This is what President Trump is saying. And this is what he is sending to the Iranians through different channels. So he's not only sending through diplomatic channels. There are channels that are strange, actually. But anyway, the issue is that after a deal is reached, let's assume now that on Thursday there is a deal. The Iranians accept to remove the 400 kilograms, dilute them to 1.5%, from 60% to 1.5%, accept the idea of de facto no enrichment without having to commit to zero enrichment. Well, I mean, there are going to be attempts to go around the words, and vocabulary should be a very big help for negotiators to come out with a final paper. But let me assume that this is going to happen. There's going to be a deal. What about the ballistics? I think that's the real elephant in the room. It's not the nuclear anymore, because President Trump said it after the 12 days war and the American intervention at the last day, that Iran's nuclear program is hit hard. I mean, he said it's adulterated, it's gone. But let me say it's hit very hard. Let me say it's a de facto stalling or de facto frozen program. Okay, so it doesn't really pose a threat. What really, from an Israeli and American point of view, because the Israeli point of view is important here, it's the ballistic program that poses threat. So what are the Iranians going to do? The Iranians are saying they are not ready to talk about this issue. So, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying to explain. So, yeah, I see that this is the main issue. Even if there is a deal this week, next week, there is going to be another threat, because the ballistics is not an issue that they can reach a deal on.
And why do you think, I mean, having been inside Tehran just recently, why is the regime not conceding on this issue? And what is the status of the
Well,
regime as you've seen it? I mean,
they,
they've had a very turbulent 12 months.
look, we have to take into consideration something that this system in Iran isn't weak. Despite all what is being said, it's not a weak system. It's still in control. There are a lot of reasons for them to be concerned, and I see that, and I saw that. The way people are now dealing is different from before, but still they have a solid block that they depend on, and that's why they feel that they are still strong. This is one. Second thing is that why are they going to concede, or why are they going to accept giving up their ballistics? Because if they are going to give their ballistics, they know that the second day there's going to be another war on them. So to them, this is existential. It's the only, let me say, sort of defense they have. They've not, at least what they say, they didn't build a bomb. So given the fact they do not have a bomb, the only deterrence they have is their missiles. And in the last war with Israel, it proved that these missiles can pose a threat. So why should they give up such a power for them, or such an addition to them, or the deterrence, the only factor of deterrence they have? So to them, and at the same time, and actually I wrote this for Foreign Policy last week, that they do not see that the Americans are going to hit. And to me, this is a miscalculation, because with all what we are seeing in the region, the buildup, the military assets, and despite all the threats, despite all the risks, but this buildup isn't just for diplomatic pressure. This buildup is to be used. So what I heard over there is that the Americans do not dare. Why they do not dare? Because the whole region is going to be chaos. Okay, what if they decided to take this? I mean, this was the discussion. What if the Americans decided to take such a move and do the strike?
Thank you. I want to go to Holly to follow up a little bit on what Ali said. There is also, the movement, the protest movement that we saw inside Iran, the brutal crackdown, and it sort of died down a little in the last 2 weeks and a half, and now we're seeing it back. We've seen protests at the universities, mostly youth driven. From your reading, from your understanding of these voices in Iran, what does the situation look like for the protests and for the Islamic Republic?
Well, you would think that a month after an unprecedented massacre, one where the numbers are between over 7,000, according to the group Human Rights Activists in Iran, and they're still reviewing 11,000 additional numbers to the 32,000 that President Donald Trump cited last week, that these anti-regime Iranians would retreat in fear. But as you've noted, it's been the absolute opposite. And I mean, they're not making headlines in the same way, but we've been seeing that for weeks now, we've seen smaller scale protests, mostly among medical students who are demanding the release of their detained colleagues, nurses and doctors who had treated protesters in hospitals or makeshift treatment centers. On February 17th, the same day as the Geneva talks, actually, which was seen as an insult to the slain protesters and their families, the families of the slain protesters, there was the 40th day memorial ceremonies, or the chehele ceremonies, as we say in Persian, for slain protesters that were held in various parts of Iran. And what we've been seeing is that since the funerals that had happened in January, these Iranians have been turning their griefs into defiance. So they're wearing white, they're playing music, they're dancing, they're releasing kites and doves, balloons, and they've even been having symbolic weddings for those that have been killed. And this isn't a society where I would say there's because of the Islamic Republic, there's death worship, there's murals of Iran-Iraq martyrs. So this is the complete opposite of what the Islamic Republic represents. And so That has been some of the movement we've been seeing just last week. And one of the most popular chants for those slain protesters these days has been, "This flower's scattered petals have become the gifts of the homeland." And so that's what we've been hearing chanted, of course, amongst all the anti-regime protests chants that we've been hearing in recent weeks. You noted that there's been these university protests. And this actually started on Saturday, when the new academic term began. And so we've been seeing this in the capital, Tehran, at Iran's MIT, which is known as Sharif University, and the holy city of Mashhad in the northeast, these protests. And just to give you a visual, what these Gen Z Iranians are doing, they're like unbelievable bravery, things that we wouldn't really think about in the West. But for example, at Sharif, which is Iran's MIT, they hung a little mouse with a turban and said this is the supreme leader and that they were executing him. And then like things that, that would result people being sent to prison. They burned Islamic Republic flags. And there were even chants about the former crown prince, Reza Pahlavi. This is the last battle. Pahlavi will return. Long live the Shah. And this is all happening in this environment. And I should just talk a bit about the numbers for a second, a bit more. There's been over 53,000 arrests. There have been at least 552 executions since January. And in February, just now, they said that it's been 246 alone. So by March, we will see double the number of executions since last year, which was the highest since the 1980s. And there are at least 30 people facing the death penalty in relation to the uprising, including two children. And so, and just to give you a sense about the level of just what this massacre meant, the numbers are not even comparable to the 1979 revolution. And historian Dr. Ali Ansari had told me recently, he said you'd have to go back to the 1790s to look at that kind of violence from the state against the people of Iran. So just to give you a sense that this is the environment that Iranians are operating in, but they're really going out and still risking their lives because they want this regime gone. And it's because they believe in that.
How much of a threat are these protests, this movement, the unprecedented numbers you've mentioned, to the regime, and President Trump famously said help is on the way, but then, nothing came through. Uh, how would you evaluate their chance of success without outside help?
Well, the truth is the regime still controls the streets, and they are still in power, of course. But that being said, these numbers, they're not big, but they're meaningful because it demonstrates that the status quo is no longer sustainable, and that's why the regime is in the predicament it's been in because of these cyclical anti-regime protests that have been occurring, I would say, since the December 2017, January 2018 protests onwards. And of course, most famously came to head in 2022 with the Women Life Freedom Uprising. Um, when we talk about President Trump's comments on the protests, that did play a role in sending people out in the streets. That, and of course, former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi's call for people to go out on January 8th and 9th. And Iranians, of course, heeded that call. And that's why there was a communication shutdown. And then we unfortunately saw this subsequent massacre take place. I think that increasingly Iranians are in a position now where they realize that they can't do this on their own. And you've heard these real surprising calls for R2P, or responsibility to protect, from not just in the diaspora, but inside Iran. And you've heard it from on the outside, people like Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi, and on the inside, activists like Nasrin Sotoudeh. And it's because they realize that they're going against guns, and these are unarmed, peaceful protesters. And so, of course, there's questions about what that will look like, but I think there's increasingly this sense of desperation of change, and that it can only come with the outside help. And it's something that it's become increasingly part of the conversations amongst some anti-regime Iranians, I would say.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I want to go back to you. When you follow the administration, the debate within the White House, within the State Department on the deal. Why wouldn't this administration settle for something similar to the JCPOA, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very difficult for Trump to agree to any deal that looks remotely like a rebranded JCPOA, one that, allows any kind of limited nuclear activity for alleged civilian purposes when he has been so adamant about zero enrichment. I don't know how you sort of climb down from that. And, just to kind of take a step back, going into Thursday's talks, Iran's maximum concessions that they say they're willing to make do not meet Trump's minimum demands of zero enrichment. And, the Iranians have long insisted that their right to enrich uranium, that they have that right. And, they claim it's for peaceful purposes, and yet they've enriched well beyond what's required for nuclear power reactors. But they say this enrichment is non-negotiable. And actually, just before our webinar, the Iranian foreign minister tweeted something to that effect. Whereas the U.S. position on enrichment has at times been less explicit, but a White House official told me yesterday that Trump's current position in these talks is Iran cannot enrich uranium. In a way, that's already fact on the ground. The U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities last summer means that Iran is not actively enriching. So then the question becomes, and this goes back to what you were asking, Joyce, can there be compromise that would be acceptable to Trump? The Iranians have floated different scenarios in which they, might agree to some sort of formal pause on the already suspended enrichment. There's talk of folding their enrichment into some regional consortium for nuclear power. But again, I don't think that's politically tenable for Trump. If I'm reading what he's saying correctly, although that's kind of a fool's errand because his rationale for military action and what he wants in a deal has sort of evolved. But it does seem like the two sides' positions here are irreconcilable, and that's not even touching the missiles and the proxies, which the Trump team says they would also want. So I think that's sort of where we are.
And the amount of military hardware that's in the Middle East already, something gotta give. So where is that also going? We have many questions from the audience just about that, and we do have actually our national security correspondent, defense correspondent, Jared Zuba on the line. So Jared, if I can bring you in just to answer that question, what do you make about all these military deployments? Are they just for pressure? And when we talk about military options, to what end game? We've seen the strike in June, and here we are again at having a similar debate. So if you can address these.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's very much at the crux of the dilemma that the US faces now. I think the White House is facing is that the reality is the United States doesn't have, as far as we know, good military options that can eliminate Iran's nuclear program. It never has. The strikes that we saw in June of last year with Operation Midnight Hammer, that was sort of the culmination of more than a decade, well more than a decade of planning at the Pentagon and adjacent agencies to come up with the best possible military option to set back the Iranian nuclear program, but it can't eliminate the knowledge that's been embedded in Iranian institutions and diffuse, among Iranian scientists. So that's been the broad assessment at the top of the Pentagon across several administrations, that military options aren't going to destroy the Iranian nuclear program. They can set it back, which is obviously why you saw, almost a decade ago now, the Obama administration go for a diplomatic option, focusing on international economic pressure on Iran. The Trump administration has taken something of an inverted approach. Essentially, instead of offering the carrot of economic relief, they're offering the stick of essentially guaranteed military force if the Iranian government doesn't come back to the table. But this is, it needs to be emphasized. I mean, this is an approach that's never been tested in the case of Iran. The United States has never acquired strategic concessions from Iran with the threat of military force alone. And we've seen reports that the president is considering smaller scale strikes, perhaps on IRGC headquarters, to sort of pressure and send a signal to Iran's leaders that they're serious about threatening their leadership, and to hope to get them to the table through those. There's a great deal of uncertainty with that. Former Pentagon planners to whom I've spoken in recent weeks have essentially said, that the maximum option for the president is to go through with, targeting a decapitation of regime leadership, while launching diversionary strikes on Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure. That would be the sort of maximum option. But the question again here is, what is that going to achieve? Because the president's goals are to end Iran's nuclear enrichment program. And as any serious Iran observer can tell you, I'm sure Ali here will say that's not only unlikely to sort of end the Iranian government's flirtation with nuclear technology and nuclear experimentation, it may well encourage it if the IRGC were to fill the void of leadership. So there's a great deal of uncertainty here. I think it's not surprising that we see these reports that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General Dan Kane, has reportedly been advising caution on larger strikes against Iran to the president. Mm-hmm. That reflects the broader consensus within the top Pentagon leadership across several administrations. What's more interesting here, I think, is the timing of that leak. This was, published in the New York Times, I believe, on Sunday or Saturday, and then the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post have it as well. So, this is coming out just as the USS Ford, the largest U.S. aircraft carrier in its fleet, is just reaching the Eastern Mediterranean, likely to be in a position to defend Israel, to prepare for second and third order attacks of retaliation. And it's also happening as US F-22s should be arriving in the region today, if they haven't already, from, I believe it wasn't Fairford in the UK. Anyway, so
but
we're
from
seeing
your reading of this military hardware, of the nature of these weapons, this is for limited strikes that you're saying, decapitation of heads of the regime if it's successful, targeting maybe again of nuclear facilities or ballistic missile storage facilities. That's the extent of it. Sorry, go ahead.
I think the fundamental point here is that this buildup is for coercion, to change the regime's behavior, to bring them to, regime leaders to the table, to agree to swear off of any further pursuit of nuclear enrichment, because the U.S. military cannot cannot end the Iranian government's, experimentation with nuclear enrichment. It's widely been seen by senior Pentagon officials over the past decade that the alleged Israeli project of assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists has not, in fact, ended or significantly set back the Iranian government's progress. So what we're seeing now and what's untested is this use of military force, the threat of military force for coercion. Now, of course, the problem is when you make that threat, you have the burden of follow through. So the Trump administration, having already dealt its forgive the pun, but the trump card of its military option with Operation Midnight Hammer last June, you now see them resorting to additional threats of military force, which suggests that they don't have many other options to bring the Iranian government to the table. And the Trump administration very likely could be, as a number of analysts have pointed out, boxing itself into a corner in which it's going to have to act. And it's very uncertain that any of the options that the president has are going to further his objectives.
Thank you. I do want to go to Ali for somebody in the audience just asked the same question I had. Ali, in the event of if we see strikes, if we see a limited military operation inside Iran, if the U.S. bombs this weekend, you wrote the very insightful piece why the response this time could be very different from June. So how would you, what's your reading of the Iranian response if that happens?
Well, the fact that the way the Iranians have been reacting to attacks, mainly the 12-day war, was more of a face-saving responses and symbolic retaliation. And that proved to be just encouraging the other side to attack more and more. And that's not creating any kind of deterrence for them. Given the fact over the past 47 years, there have been a lot of slogans going on, and since, let me say, the end of the Iran-Iraq war, the concentration was mainly on building a ballistic missiles program that could defend the country. So now it's becoming really an urge to the system, especially from their own base. You know, as we've been saying, the country is divided. It's not there is those who are completely against the regime. They want the whole Islamic Republic to fall, and they are outspoken. You can hear them on the streets of Tehran. So they're not hiding anymore. And in general, in every country, those who want to live are the majority. They don't care. It's not that they don't care, but they want to live their life, and that's it. And you have those who are the solid block, the ideologues, the people who are ideological and they are behind the system. Those today are questioning actually the government or the establishment's responses and retaliation to any attack, because the first promise of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 was independence and dignity. So this is now a big issue when it comes to such an attack. So now with this situation, if Iran is going to be under attack, how is this establishment going to respond? How is Khamenei going to respond? It's clear for now that they've taken the decision to retaliate hard. Now, how is this going to happen? Especially that based on the readings in Tehran, this is now existential. It's not anymore an attack or a war to change the direction. It's existential. And it's meant mainly, even if there are a lot of stances coming out from Washington, mainly from the president, that he's not really looking mainly to replace the regime for now or to topple the regime for now. But they know that it's just the process. The process starts with hits, and it happened before with Saddam Hussein. He had several hits, and at the end they came for him. So this reading is there in Iran, and that's why they might be in a situation where they'd want to show that they can really hurt. And that could see not only Iran responding, it could see also the Iraqis, Hezbollah. I don't know. I mean, we are not, personally as a journalist, I'm not able to know how much they're ready for that. But it seems that they want them to do that.
You've mentioned Hezbollah. We're seeing alarming signs in Lebanon. Ali, today the Lebanese foreign minister, he's saying Israel could hit the infrastructure. It could hit Beirut International Airport in the event Hezbollah enters the war after a strike. How vulnerable is Lebanon? Is Hezbollah in a better position now than it was in June?
Well, is it in better position than it was in June? No one can say really, because Hezbollah before the 2024 war is not the same Hezbollah today. And I'm not talking about capabilities. I'm not talking about weapons, missiles, etc. I'm talking about the mindset. The new Hezbollah mindset is different. So in the past, you'd be able to get some kind of, let me say, indications that things are changing. They're getting something new. They're boosting their capabilities. Now you don't see them anymore. You don't hear from them anymore. And to me, I think Hezbollah has replaced its own past, let me say, toolkit with a new toolkit towards Hezbollah's ballistics and Hezbollah's Katyushas and Hezbollah. Personally, I think that Hezbollah is heading towards a new toolkit, a new way of fighting. Now, what's this going to be? What are the tools? This is what I don't know. And I think that for Hezbollah to get into this war, it should be really existential. And for Iran, the reading is that this war is existential. So how will Naim Qassem, the new leader of already the leader of Hezbollah, deal with this situation? And I know that over the past months, he has been pushing back, and he doesn't want really to involve the party in any kind of adventures. So will this continue even in a situation where there is an existential threat? Because he knows very well that in case the Islamic Republic collapses, is weakened, he is going also to pay the price.
Holly, do you agree that this would be an existential war for the regime if the U.S. strikes? And then you mentioned the Pahlavi as, you know, one side of the Iranian opposition. Can you talk a little bit about the Iranian opposition? For those of us on the outside, it does look very fragmented. We don't know of a leadership that could be acceptable if what Jared, what Ali talked about, decapitation of regime hats takes place.
Well, I would say the Islamic Republic has been in an existential crisis since the 2022 Women Life Freedom Uprising, in that overwhelmingly much of its population of 91 million is opposed to the regime. And since then, the country has not been able to go back to the way it was. And with this unprecedented massacre, the Islamic Republic has now crossed a threshold of no return. So even if Trump was somehow to make a deal in this moment and there was no war, the people would not settle for the status quo, because the systemic issues that have been around for 47 years, systemic mismanagement, corruption, and repression, will continue to persist. And that's why you've seen this call for the ouster of the Islamic Republic. His reform has been dead for a long time. And if this regime was capable of reform, it would have already done it. And that's why the people are out on the streets knowing they'll be met with bullets and batons. And it's because they recognize that this regime is the only answers for this regime to go. On the question of opposition, I like to always say that there's many Nelson Mandelas in Iran, but most of them are in prison. And so I mentioned Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi earlier, who's outside in exile. And then there's Nobel laureate Narges Mohammadi, who's currently in prison. People like Mohammadi and other activists have called for a constitutional assembly and a referendum, and just in January, transition to secular democracy. But the truth is that the Islamic Republic has created a space where no opposition can really exist inside the country. And that's why you're seeing that Iranians are turning to the outside, to former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. And it's not just because he has an institutional legacy, but it's also he's offered himself as a transitional leader in this moment. And I mentioned some of the pro-Pahlavi chants. There were over a dozen anti-regime chants, some of which that are not related to Pahlavi. I'll mention just in the context. We've had No to Gaza, No to Lebanon, Our Lives for Iran because of the money spent on proxies. We've had Death to Khamenei and whatnot. Well, we've also been seeing the pre-1979 flag, the lion and sun, be a popular symbol in this latest uprising. And we've even seen pictures of Pahlavi himself and his late father. I saw a drawing of his late father at one of the university protests just, I believe, yesterday. And so it's come to this moment, and I know there's some questions about him, but we have to remember and be open-minded. There is precedent in Iranian history of somebody coming from outside the country that's been in exile, and that person was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who had been in exile for 15 years before he came back to Iran. And I think I should also emphasize that Pahlavi has also managed to galvanize much of the diaspora. There were more than 1 million diaspora Iranians that rallied in cities around the world for his call for a day of action on Valentine's Day during the Munich Security Conference. So 1 in 6 diaspora Iranians were out in the streets on February 14. And so the diaspora Iranians are mirroring some of the feelings and sentiments of people inside Iran. That being said, Iran is still a country of 91 million people, and they have many opinions like other countries. But I think in this moment, increasingly, that's why you're seeing his name being chanted in the streets of Iran.
Elizabeth, Holly mentioned, many Iranians in prison, many Nelson Mandelas in prison. We also have, some hostages, U.S. hostages that are still in Iran. We have Americans that could be stuck in Iran in an event of war. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, actually, this is something Holly and I have discussed. We've heard nothing from Trump or his officials about the Americans who are detained by the Iranian regime. At last count, I know that the State Department's Office for Hostage Affairs was formally tracking the cases of 6 who were held or on house arrest on politically motivated charges. There are likely more than that. Their advocates, some of whom I've spoken with, say, the Trump administration should be using its military buildup and threats of war to press for the release of these Americans. Because as you mentioned, if the U.S. does go through with these strikes, the risk profile for those Americans goes way up. And as we saw after last summer's 12-day war, and I think, Holly, I think you've written about this, Iran tends to respond by detaining more foreign citizens to use as bargaining chips. So that is a real concern, both for the Americans and other Westerners that are currently detained, and the potential that we could see more of that hostage taking.
Ali, you are in the Gulf now, I believe. It's been interesting leading up to this escalation. Gulf states one after another just publicly just voice out their concern, how much they're worried about a war, how much they're worried about retaliation. And I see that you're driving, so I want you to be safe as well. But can you tell us a little bit, how does Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar view the risk of war?
Well, it's not only Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. It's Kuwait, it's Bahrain, it's everyone in this area. We were today actually chatting at work that are we going to stock things at home? How things might be if there's going to be a war. Is there going to be a possibility that we see the picture? I mean, in June 2025, the Iranian response was symbolic. Yet Doha was hit. The American base or the military base in Doha was hit. But everyone heard and everyone saw. And later on, there was another attack by Israel on Doha. So people felt the pressure, felt the risk, felt the danger. And now, I mean, it's not only about the governments, it's about normal people. And everyone knows over here a kind of the confrontation between the United States and Iran is going to spill over in a way or another. There are going to be, an impact somewhere here in this region. There are tens of thousands of United States military personnel in this area. There are several American bases in this area. So, yeah, this is one of the possibilities. And that's why the Gulf countries are keen, and they've been actually pushing, and we've seen at least how these mediators are working, especially when it comes to the Omanis, when it comes to the Qataris. Both are doing a lot of effort to try to rid this region from such a confrontation. And when I was in Tehran last month, the Qatari Prime Minister at the last moment came to Iran, and actually we were in Tehran at that time discussing amongst each other that when will it start? When will the war start? Because it was so close. So and then we saw the Qataris. Yeah, and then before that, the other strike that was supposed to be on one Wednesday, and then it seems also the Gulf countries, especially MBS, in a way or another, had their say. I do not believe that they are the only ones who stopped the hit, but at the end, they were one of those elements that helped in containing the situation. But now, I don't know if there is any more possibility except with something big. I said either a very big diplomatic breakthrough, seeing some really very senior Iranian official engaging with. I mean, I'm not talking about the Witkov Arakchi thing. I'm talking about something bigger than that. Engaging directly with President Trump, or I don't see this ending.
On this point too, I have a question for both you and Holly. Let's say, we see a war, Khamenei, they target Khamenei, is killed, his son, Mujtaba, is killed. Is the regime, does it have a succession plan in place? What does that look like?
I'll jump in on that. Well, we know for a fact that the Supreme Leader has thought through some of that, I'm sure, especially after the 12-day war, there was reports on that. But just looking at the Iranian constitution for a minute, Article 111 says that in the event that there's no Supreme Leader, basically, they would have three people that would be designated in that role interim, which is the president, which would be Masoud Pezeshkian, I think the judiciary chief, Mohsen Ejai, and I believe somebody from the Guardian Council, the 12-member, or was it the Assembly of Experts? Yeah. So basically, there are individuals that could take the lead in interim. It doesn't mean that the regime would collapse overnight. And I think there's a real misunderstanding of that, is that if you remove one person, it doesn't mean that the regime, this is not Bashar al-Assad and the whole cards fall. So I'm not exactly sure how much thought has been given into what happens next. And that's why I have to say, I didn't say this earlier, but there's a real concern among anti-regime protesters that they would be like a Venezuela scenario. And maybe the calculation would be that the US decides to do a very surgical strike on the Supreme Leader and see if they can get that deal that they want from the next person that shows up. So
And who would be Dulce Rodriguez with that? Are we looking at Rouhani or Zarif? I mean, what is the...
It's really hard to say. There's numerous names that float around. Ali, maybe you can chime in on this. I mean, there could be numerous characters. You said Rouhani. It could be somebody like Ghalibaf. It could be the large Ali Larijani that we were just reading about. It's hard to say, but I could see that being a scenario that plays out in this moment, but Venezuela being the example of that. But, I guess we'll have to see what happens before we decide on that. But Ali, please, if you have any additional comments.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the prolonged crisis is also meant at shaking the system and shaking the regime from inside and trying to find, the way to the Venezuelan model. But I don't know really. There are a lot of elements within the Iranian state right now, and with the IRGC there, with the seminary there. If Trump kills Khamenei, well, I think now it's easier for the Iranians to choose someone else. The 12-day war gave them that warning. It was kind of an early warning to them to have these measures on the track. And then I remember that at that time in the 12-day war, Khamenei had Ejai and Arafi, Ejai, the head of the judiciary, Arafi from the experts, from the Assembly of Experts, and someone from his office, Hijazi, coordinating together, and they were the transitional replacement just in case there is anything. And I think for now there are plans. And to be frank, what I read in Le Figaro or other publications, they do not make sense, to be frank. I mean, the idea of Rouhani doing a coup against, how would he be able to do the coup? He doesn't have any elements to help him do a coup. A coup in Iran isn't something really easy. I mean, as Holly was saying, even if you kill the supreme leader, it's not going to topple anything, because it's a very complicated system. They did it in a way that even if you take the head, nothing is going to really happen to the system. It will find a way to get another head. So the idea of a coup, I think internal politics is right now being very reflective in media, in international media, because from inside, those who are right now competing among each other to be the next, let me say, the next leaders or the next elite, they are right now fighting their fight on in the newspapers, in international newspapers, doing some leaks, telling New York Times something, telling whoever, Le Figaro something, telling me something. I mean, we are all vulnerable sometimes to such situations when you get the scoop and then you want to go with it. But I don't see that these scoops right now are really solid. So sorry for talking a lot about this, but the idea is that in the case Ali Khamenei is killed, I'm afraid actually that I'll see a more hardline replacement, especially if this comes during the war. Because right now, if we go to the Assembly of Experts, the calculation is not in any reformist, let me say, a candidate's favor. So if Hassan Rouhani actually is outside the assembly, I'll assume that he'll be taken to, I mean, he'll be a candidate. How many votes will he get in such a lineup in the Assembly of Experts? I think that we will see names such as Arafi, EJE, and they are hardliners. We'll see someone like Mir Bakri, and this is like the ultra right in Iran. This is the replacement of Ali Khamenei. It's not going to be let me say a cool, moderate replacement.
I feel I always go to Holly and Ali for the worst case scenario. So Elizabeth, just to cool things off a little bit, Iran is also asking for sanctions relief. Is there any kind of package that the administration can offer? We've also saw actually an NBC report saying, there are oil and gas deals that Iran could find, very appetizing for this administration in particular, and offer that. So tell us a little bit about these kind of reports and what kind of sanctions relief is Iran looking for?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked about this because I do think it has been sort of overlooked in the discussion of what the two sides are negotiating and what Iran is asking for in return for a deal, and that is massive sanctions relief. And this is part of what tripped up the negotiations under the Biden administration as it sought to re-enter a nuclear deal with Iran. This is something I remember Ali and I writing quite a bit about back in the day. In addition to providing relief from financial sanctions, at the time, Iran also wanted the U.S. to lift the terrorist designation of the IRGC, which would have been politically very difficult for the Biden administration. I think in many ways, Trump does operate outside of the usual political constraints. He could grant some sanctions relief without the kind of backlash that Biden or another president would have. But then going back to what the Iranians are asking for, it's just a little hard to envision because I think, if the Iranians, for example, are required to eliminate their stockpile of highly enriched uranium, that would be seen in Tehran as an irreversible concession. And I think, they would want in return something similarly irreversible from the United States. And so they would want, not just the sanctions relief, but the unfreezing of billions of dollars in assets. And so I think going back to what Holly has been talking about, the fact that this is playing out in the aftermath of Iran's massacre of protesters, I just think the optics of that would be very difficult for Trump, and is another reason I'm just very skeptical that we'll see a deal this week or in the near future.
Holly, how much is the administration prepared for regime change?
I don't think it's unique to this administration that they're not prepared for regime change. I think that Western officials in general, whether they're in the US or Europe, are not prepared for regime change because they haven't really imagined a world where the Islamic Republic would no longer exist. And I wrote about this in my New York Times piece in January about the need for serious policy planning. And I think what really makes things worse right now is that we're dealing with an administration that has doged and riffed people that have these expertise, like the best and brightest that are working on Iran and policy planning that are no longer in senior roles. So even in this moment, if they were deciding to start this serious policy planning, like who are they delegating it to? I've certainly not heard them talk to human rights organizations working on Iran about transitional justice, for example. And I get the sense they haven't talked coordinated with US allies or even entertained the idea of what sanctions relief would look like in a post-Islamic republic.
Mm.
And, in the lead up to the Iraq War, there was that Future of Iraq project that was organized by the State Department, and they were consulting more than 200 diaspora Iraqis to strategize on how to build a stable and democratic Iraq. And we, of course, know how that all turned out, but at least there was some considerable thought given to that. But to our understanding, and I'm sure Elizabeth from her reporting at Sage, I don't think any of this is happening at a top USG level. The diaspora is certainly thinking about it. There are working groups happening at this juncture. And I mentioned former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He has an emergency booklet about the post 100 days after the fall of the Islamic Republic that was done with a group of experts inside and outside Iran. But beyond that, I just don't get the sense that they're really thinking through what regime change could look like.
Thank you. I see we have a lot of questions on Russia and China. I'll just put my 2 cents out there as the author of the I'll Monitor China newsletter. It's a flip coin for China. On the one hand, they are very happy that the U.S. military hardware is moving from South China Sea and near Taiwan to the Gulf. They're very happy to see also the U.S. potentially engaged in a prolonged conflict in the Middle East. At the same time, they're not looking forward, to the possibility of their one of their closest partners in the Middle East being overthrown, especially after Venezuela. Are they arming? Yes, they're sending some tech help, but not to a level that could save the regime. We have 1 minute left, and Ali, I just want to leave that last question to you. Could you see Iran hitting targets inside Europe or the United States if an attack happens?
First, I don't think that there's a capability to do that. I mean, I don't see that what's going to happen. Iran's main targets right now are in the Gulf, are in the Sea of Oman, and Israel, of course. American bases in Jordan. Now there's no more American base in Syria, no more in Iraq, except for probably in Erbil. So I think this is the area that we're going to see Iranian activities in. However, the killing of Khamenei could create a new situation with respect to Shia, let me say, jihadism, which didn't exist in the past years. It used to be there in the 80s. A new sort of activities that could maybe be seen in areas around the world against American interests, against Western interests. So probably a Beirut 2.0.
Mm. Well, this was excellent. Ali Hashem, Holy Dagres, Elizabeth Hagedorn, thank you so much. Thanks to Marita Cassis, also Audrey Boulos on the tech side for having this happen. Hope next time we meet, it's a more peaceful conversation. So thank you all for following us. If you're not a subscriber to El Monitor, please consider subscribing. Thanks for this and have a nice day.